The sound of classical piano echoed through the concrete tunnels of Grand Central Station, cutting through the chaos of rushing commuters like a knife through silk. Most people hurried past without a second glance, their minds focused on meetings, deadlines, and the relentless pace of New York City life. But one man stopped dead in his tracks. Richard Harrison, CEO of Harrison Industries and one of the most powerful men on Wall Street, stood frozen among the crowd. His $5,000 Italian suit, a stark contrast to the subway's grimy walls. Something about the melody gripped him, a haunting piece he hadn't heard in over a decade. As he pushed through the sea of people toward the music, he had no idea he was about to come face to face with the biggest mistake of his life. Sitting at a battered upright piano was a teenage girl, maybe 16, her clothes worn but clean, her fingers dancing across the keys with impossible grace. Her tip jar contained only a few crumpled bills, but she played as if she were performing at Carnegie Hall. Richard's breath caught in his throat as he studied her face, the delicate features, the determined set of her jaw, the way she lost herself completely in the music. She looked exactly like someone he'd spent 15 years trying to forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of October 15th started like any other for Richard Harrison. His alarm sounded at 5 a.m. sharp in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, and within minutes, his perfectly orchestrated routine was in motion. Personal trainer at 5:30, breakfast prepared by his private chef at 6:45, and his driver waiting with the Bentley by 7:30 to take him to Harrison Industries' towering headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. At 42, Richard had built an empire. From nothing, Harrison Industries dominated 3 major sectors: technology, real estate, and renewable energy, with annual revenues exceeding $8 billion. Forbes had named him one of the most influential CEOs under 50, and his face graced the covers of business magazines worldwide. He lived in a world of board meetings, merger negotiations, and power lunches, where a single handshake could move millions of dollars. But success had come at a price. 2 failed marriages, estranged relationships with most of his family, and a social circle that consisted entirely of business associates who wanted something from him. Richard told himself he didn't mind the isolation. It was the cost of greatness, the sacrifice necessary to stay at the top. This particular morning, however, fate had other plans. "Sir, there's been an accident on the FDR Drive," his driver, Marcus, announced through the intercom as they sat in gridlock traffic. "We're looking at least an hour delay. You're 9 o'clock with the Japanese investors." "Cancel it," Richard said curtly, already calculating how to restructure his day. "I'll take the subway. Drop me at Grand Central." Marcus's eyebrows shot up in the rearview mirror. In the 5 years he'd worked for Richard, he'd never known his boss to set foot on public transportation. "Sir, are you certain? I could try the surface streets." "Grand Central," Richard repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. 20 minutes later, Richard found himself in a world he'd almost forgotten existed. The subway station teemed with ordinary people living ordinary lives. Office workers clutching coffee cups, students with backpacks, elderly couples moving slowly through the crowd. The air smelled of coffee, concrete, and that indefinable urban mixture of thousands of human stories intersecting in one space. He was making his way toward the express line when the music stopped him cold. The melody drifted through the morning, rush hour chaos like a thread of gold woven through rough fabric. It was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, played with a technical precision and emotional depth that made Richard's chest tighten with unexpected recognition. He'd heard this piece countless times before, but never quite like this, never with such raw, honest beauty, Following the sound through the maze of corridors, Richard emerged into a wider area where commuters gathered in an informal semicircle around a beaten-up upright piano. The instrument had seen better days. Its black paint was chipped, several keys were yellowed with age, and it was obviously out of tune. But the girl sitting before it transformed it into something magical. She couldn't have been more than 16 or 17, with long, dark hair that fell like a curtain around her face as she played. Her clothes were simple, dark jeans, a faded blue sweater with a small hole near the left elbow, and worn sneakers that had been carefully cleaned, despite their age. Everything about her spoke of careful maintenance on a tight budget, of someone who took pride in her appearance despite limited resources. But it was her face that made Richard's world tilt on its axis. Even in profile, the resemblance was unmistakable. The elegant line of her nose, the determined set of her jaw, the way her eyebrows drew together in concentration, features he knew as well as his own reflection. Features that belonged to someone he'd spent 15 years trying to forget. Sarah Mitchell, the woman who'd walked out of his life when he'd refused to choose between his rising career and their relationship. The woman who'd been carrying his child when she left. Richard's hands began to shake as memories flooded back. Sarah's tearful ultimatum the night before he was supposed to sign the deal that would launch Harrison Industries. Her pleas for him to postpone the meeting, to be present for their baby's birth, to choose family over fortune, his cold refusal, and the terrible words he'd spoken. If you can't handle the demands of my success, then maybe you're not the right person to share it with me. She'd left the next morning while he was at his meeting, taking nothing but her clothes and the life growing inside her. Richard had hired private investigators to find her, but Sarah had vanished completely, leaving no trace, no forwarding address, no way for him to make amends, even if he'd wanted to. And he had wanted to. By the time his company went public and the initial rush of success wore off, the emptiness of his achievement had become unbearable. He'd made billions, but he'd lost the only two people who'd ever truly mattered to him. Now, watching this girl play with the same intense focus Sarah had brought to everything she did, Richard felt the carefully constructed walls around his heart begin to crumble. The timeline fit perfectly. If Sarah had carried the pregnancy to term, their child would be exactly this age. The girl's fingers moved across the keys with trained precision, her technique far beyond what any casual hobbyist could achieve. She'd clearly been taught by someone who understood classical music at a deep level. As she transitioned from Chopin to a piece Richard didn't recognize, something modern but equally complex, a small crowd gathered, dropping bills and coins into the open guitar case at her feet. Richard noticed other details that made his chest tighten. The sheet music propped on the piano's ledge was worn and dog-eared, obviously studied extensively. Her hands, despite their youth, showed the calluses and strength that came from years of serious practice. This wasn't a talented amateur busking for fun. This was a trained musician using her skills to survive. A businessman in an expensive suit dropped a 20 into her case and paused to speak to her. "You're incredibly talented, young lady. Do you study somewhere?" The girl's fingers never stopped moving, but she glanced up with a polite smile. "Thank you. I teach myself mostly, with some help from online videos and library books." Her voice hit Richard like a physical blow. It carried the same musical quality as Sarah's, the same slight rasp that appeared when she was tired or emotional. But there was something else in her tone, a weariness that no 16-year-old should possess, a guardedness that spoke of hard experience and disappointment. Self-taught? The businessman looked impressed. "Have you considered applying to music schools? With talent like yours, music school costs money," the girl replied simply, her fingers moving into a more complex passage that effectively ended the conversation. The businessman nodded awkwardly and moved on, but Richard caught the flash of longing that crossed her face before she composed herself. He found himself stepping closer, drawn by an invisible force he couldn't resist. The girl was everything he'd imagined his daughter might become. Talented, determined, beautiful in the way that came from inner strength rather than artificial enhancement. But she was also clearly struggling, using her gifts to scrape together money in one of the world's most unforgiving cities. As she finished her current piece, Richard impulsively reached for his wallet. He pulled out $100 bill, more than was in her case combined, and stepped forward to drop it among the smaller donations. The girl looked up, and their eyes met for the first time. Richard's breath caught in his throat. Her eyes were the same deep brown as Sarah's, flecked with tiny gold highlights that seemed to capture and reflect light. But where Sarah's eyes had always sparkled with optimism and joy, these held shadows of experience and loss. They were old eyes in a young face, beautiful but guarded. "Thank you," she said quietly, her gaze dropping to the bill in her case. For just a moment, surprise flickered across her features. Clearly, $100 tips weren't common, but she recovered quickly. "That's very generous." "You're incredibly talented," Richard managed, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "How long have you been playing?" "Since I was little," she replied, her hands moving to a new piece, something gentler, more introspective. "My mom started teaching me when I was 5. The mention of her mother made Richard's chest clench. "Is she also a musician?" Something shifted in the girl's expression, a brief shadow of pain that she quickly masked. "She was. She passed away 2 years ago." The words hit Richard like a sledgehammer. Sarah was gone. The woman he'd loved and lost, the mother of his child, was dead. All the years he'd spent wondering about her, hoping someday he might find a way to apologize and make things right, and she was gone. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words feeling completely inadequate. The girl nodded, her fingers finding comfort in the familiar patterns of music. "She was an amazing pianist. Everything I know, I learned from her." Richard wanted to ask 100 questions about Sarah, about this girl's life, about how they'd survived alone in New York, but something in her demeanor warned him not to push. She had the defensive posture of someone who'd learned to protect herself, who'd been hurt by well-meaning strangers before. Instead, he listened as she played, drinking in every detail of her appearance and trying to reconcile the reality before him with the fantasies he'd harbored for years about the child he'd never known. She was perfect and heartbreaking and completely out of his reach, separated by years of absence and choices that couldn't be undone. The flow of commuters around them continued, but Richard remained rooted in place, unable to tear himself away from this glimpse into the life he'd abandoned. This was his daughter. He was certain of it now, and she was struggling alone in the world, while he lived in luxury just miles away. As if sensing his intense scrutiny, the girl glanced up again, her expression curious but wary. "Is there something else?" she asked politely. Richard realized he'd been staring and forced himself to step back. "No, your music is beautiful. Thank you for sharing it." She smiled then, the first genuinely warm expression he'd seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. For just a moment, she looked exactly like Sarah had at that age, radiant, hopeful, full of dreams about the future. "Music is meant to be shared," she said simply, then returned her attention to the keys. Richard walked away on unsteady legs, his mind reeling with the magnitude of what he'd discovered. His daughter, his and Sarah's daughter, was alive, talented, and struggling to survive in the very city where he commanded billions. She'd grown up without him, learned to play piano from the woman he'd driven away, and was now using those skills to earn money in subway stations, while he sat in boardrooms making deals that would never fill the hole in his heart. As he finally made his way to the platform for his train. One thought echoed in his mind above all others. He had to find a way to be part of her life. But after 15 years of absence, how could he possibly explain who he was and why he'd never been there? When she needed him most, the answer, he realized, would require more courage than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Richard Harrison had no idea how to proceed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Richard's hands trembled as he sat in his corner office 50 floors above Manhattan, staring unseeing at quarterly reports that usually commanded his absolute attention. 3 days had passed since the subway encounter, and he hadn't been able to focus on anything except the girl with Sarah's eyes and the haunting melody that had shattered his carefully constructed world. He'd cancelled 2 major meetings, postponed a crucial acquisition, and barely spoken to his assistant beyond grunting acknowledgements. The Richard Harrison his employees knew, decisive, ruthless, always 3 steps ahead, had been replaced by a man haunted by ghosts he'd thought were buried forever. Mr. Harrison? His assistant, Jennifer Walsh, appeared in his doorway with a concerned expression. At 35, Jennifer had worked for Richard for 8 years and prided herself on anticipating his needs before he voiced them. She'd never seen him this distracted. The Morrison Group is holding on line 3. They need an answer about the Seattle project. Tell them I'll call back, Richard said without looking up from the photograph he'd been staring at for the past hour. It was the only picture he had of Sarah, a candid shot taken during their college years at Columbia Business School. She was laughing at something off-camera, her dark hair catching sunlight, her eyes bright with the optimism that had first drawn him to her. They'd been study partners initially, then friends, then something deeper that neither of them had been prepared for. Jennifer lingered in the doorway, clearly wanting to say something more. In 8 years of working together, she'd seen Richard navigate hostile takeovers, market crashes, and federal investigations with unshakable composure. This man sitting at his desk, holding a faded photograph like it contained the secrets of the universe, was someone entirely different. Sir, if you don't mind me saying, you seem troubled lately. Is there anything I can help with? Richard finally looked up, and Jennifer was shocked by what she saw in his eyes. The calculating sharpness was gone, replaced by something raw and vulnerable that made her instinctively want to protect him, despite his position as one of the most powerful men in the city. Jennifer, he said quietly, what do you know about hiring private investigators? The question caught her completely off guard. Private investigators. Well, the company has used several firms for corporate security and background checks. Are we dealing with some kind of threat? Not corporate, Richard said, setting the photograph down carefully. Personal. I need to find information about someone. Discreetly, Jennifer's training kicked in. After 8 years as executive assistant to a billionaire CEO, she'd learned to handle unusual requests without asking too many questions. I can have the names of 3 reputable firms on your desk within the hour. They're all bonded and have security clearances for sensitive matters. Thank you, Richard said, then hesitated. And Jennifer, this conversation stays between us. Of course, sir. As Jennifer left to make the arrangements, Richard's mind drifted back to that night 15 years ago, the last time he'd seen Sarah alive. 15 years earlier, the argument had started over dinner in their cramped apartment near Columbia. Sarah was 5 months pregnant, her belly just beginning to show beneath her favorite blue sweater. Richard was pacing the tiny living room, a contract spread across their coffee table that represented everything he'd worked toward since graduating business school. The meeting is tomorrow morning, he said for the 3rd time, running his hands through his hair. Mitchell and Associates want to make an offer. This could be it, Sarah. This could be the break we've been waiting for. Sarah sat on their second hand, and couch, one hand resting protectively on her belly. The baby's due in 4 months, Rick. I need to know you're going to be here. Not just physically present, but actually here, with us. Of course I'll be here, Richard said, but even as the words left his mouth, they both knew they weren't entirely true. His mind was already racing ahead to the possibilities the contract represented, the clients he could attract, the deals he could make, the empire he could build. Will you? Sarah's voice was quiet but steady. Because for the past 6 months, every conversation we've had has been about your business plans. When I talk about baby names, you're on your phone. When I show you the ultrasound pictures, you're reviewing market reports. I feel like I'm already raising this child alone. Richard stopped pacing and turned to face her. That's not fair, Sarah. Everything I'm doing is for us, for our future. Do you think I want to struggle in this tiny apartment forever? Do you think I want our child to grow up wondering if we can afford basic necessities? Our child needs a father who's present, not just a provider who's absent, Sarah replied. Money isn't everything, Rick. Love is. Time is. Being there for the moments that matter. Love doesn't pay for college tuition, Richard shot back, immediately regretting the harshness in his tone. Look, I know this is hard. The timing isn't. I'm perfect, but if I don't take this opportunity now, it might never come again. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Do you remember why we fell in love? The question caught Richard off guard. What does that have to do with anything? You used to talk about building something meaningful, Sarah said, her eyes distant with memory. Not just profitable, but meaningful. You wanted to create a company that made a real difference in people's lives. When did that change into just making money? It didn't change, Richard protested. The money is just a byproduct of success. The more successful I am, the more good I can do. But what about the good you can do right here? Sarah placed her hand over his, guiding it to her belly, where their child was growing. What about the difference you can make in this little person's life? Richard felt something shift beneath. His palm, the baby moving, responding to their voices and touch. For a moment, the outside world faded away, and all that existed was this connection between the three of them. But then his phone buzzed with a text from his potential business partner, and the spell was broken. I have to take this call, he said, pulling his hand away. Sarah's face crumpled with disappointment. Right now, we're in the middle of... This will just take 5 minutes, Richard said, already reaching for his phone. The contracts need to be finalized before tomorrow's meeting. As he stepped into their bedroom to take the call, Richard missed the single tear that slid down Sarah's cheek. He missed the way she wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold together something that was already falling apart. He missed the moment when the woman he loved made the hardest decision of her life. The call lasted 45 minutes. When Richard emerged from the bedroom, Sarah was gone. So were her clothes, her books, and the small wooden jewelry box her grandmother had given her. She'd left no note, no forwarding address, no way for him to find her. The only thing she'd left behind was the ultrasound picture on his pillow, with a single word written on the back in her careful handwriting: choose. Present day. The memory of that night still had the power to bring Richard to his knees. He'd made his choice, and it had cost him everything that truly mattered. The meeting the next morning had indeed launched Harrison Industries, but the success had felt hollow from the very beginning. He'd hired private investigators within a week of Sarah's departure, but she'd vanished completely. No credit card activity, no employment records, no rental agreements, nothing. It was as if she'd simply ceased to exist the moment she walked out their door. Over the years, Richard had convinced himself that maybe it was better this way. Maybe Sarah had found someone who could give her the kind of life he'd been too ambitious to provide. Maybe their child was happy and loved and better off without a father who couldn't balance work and family. But seeing that girl in the subway had shattered all those comfortable lies. Sarah was dead, and their daughter, because he was certain now that she was his daughter, was struggling alone in the same city where he commanded billions. A knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. Jennifer entered with a manila folder. "The information you requested," she said, placing it on his desk. "3 firms, all highly recommended. I took the liberty of making preliminary contact. They're all available to meet with you privately." Richard opened the folder and scanned the names and credentials. Each firm specialized in missing persons and family reunification cases. Each had impressive success rates and guarantees of discretion. "There's something else," Jennifer said hesitantly. "One of the investigators, Patricia Chen, mentioned that she's handled several cases involving adopted children searching for biological parents and vice versa. She said that if you're looking for family members, she has resources that others might not." "Thank you," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't quite hide. "Can you set up a meeting with Ms. Chen for this afternoon?" "Already done. She'll be here at 3 o'clock. As Jennifer left, Richard stared at the photograph of Sarah once more. For 15 years, he'd told himself that his choice had been necessary, that success required sacrifice, that he could make amends later when he had the resources to provide properly for his family. Now he knew the truth. There was no later. Sarah was gone, and he'd missed every moment of his daughter's childhood. Her first steps, her first words, her first piano lesson, all of it had happened without him. He'd gained the whole world and lost the only thing that could have made it worthwhile, but his daughter was still alive, still playing music with the same passion Sarah had brought to everything she did, still struggling in a world that seemed determined to overlook her talent and potential. Richard picked up his phone and dialed Jennifer's extension. "Cancel all my meetings for the rest of the week," he said, "and clear my calendar for next week as well." "Sir, are you feeling all right? The board meeting on Friday is crucial, and the Japanese investors are flying in specifically to reschedule everything," Richard said firmly. "I have more important business to attend to." For the first time in 15 years, Richard Harrison was putting family first. He just hoped it wasn't too late to matter. As he sat in his office preparing for the meeting with Patricia Chen, Richard made a silent promise to the memory of the woman he'd loved and lost. He would find their daughter, and somehow he would make up for all the years he'd been absent. Even if she never knew who he really was, he would make sure she had every opportunity his wealth and influence could provide. The girl in the subway deserved so much more than survival. She deserved to shine, to have her talent recognized and nurtured, to know that someone believed in her potential even when the world seemed indifferent to her struggles. She deserved a father who would choose her over everything else. And finally, 15 years too late, that's exactly what she was going to get. Patricia Chen arrived at Harrison Industries exactly at 3 o'clock, her professional demeanor and sharp eyes immediately impressing Richard. At 52, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades unraveling the mysteries that families tried to bury. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct, and her reputation for discretion was legendary among New York's elite. "Mr. Harrison," she said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk, "your assistant mentioned this is a personal matter requiring absolute confidentiality." Richard nodded, studying the woman who might hold the key to reconnecting. With his daughter, Patricia's silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her tailored navy suit spoke of success without ostentation. She carried a leather portfolio that Richard suspected contained the details of cases that would make tabloid headlines if they ever became public. "Before we begin," Patricia continued, I need to make something clear. I don't work for clients who want to use my services to harm or harass people. My job is reunification, healing, and closure, not stalking or revenge. I understand, Richard said. What I'm asking for is nothing like that. Patricia opened her portfolio and withdrew a legal pad. Tell me about the situation. Richard took a deep breath, preparing to share details he'd never spoken aloud to anyone. 15 years ago, I was in a relationship with a woman named Sarah Mitchell. She was pregnant when she left me. I never met my child. Do you have reason to believe? The child is still alive. Yes, Richard said, his voice growing stronger with certainty. I encountered a teenage girl 3 days ago. The resemblance to Sarah is unmistakable, and the timing fits perfectly. Patricia made notes as Richard described the subway encounter, his voice growing thick with emotion as he recounted hearing his daughter play piano with Sarah's same passionate intensity. You mentioned the mother passed away, Patricia said. How do you know this? The girl told me herself. She said her mother died 2 years ago and had taught her everything she knew about piano. Patricia's expression grew thoughtful. Mr. Harrison, I need to ask some difficult questions. Why didn't you search for them immediately after Sarah left? Richard felt heat rise in his cheeks. I did search. I hired investigators, but Sarah had vanished completely. No trace, no records, nothing. But you gave up. The words hit Richard like a physical blow because they were true. Eventually, yes. I told myself that maybe they were better off without me, that Sarah had found someone who could provide the stability I couldn't. Patricia studied him carefully. And now? Now I know I was wrong, Richard said simply. My daughter is struggling, using her talent to survive on the streets while I sit in boardrooms, making deals that don't matter. I've spent 15 years building an empire, and for what? The only thing that ever really mattered walked out of my life because I was too selfish to see it. Patricia made more notes, her expression neutral but not unsympathetic. What exactly are you hoping to accomplish? Do you want custody, visitation rights? Or are you looking for a way to provide financial support anonymously? Richard hadn't fully considered the endgame, and Patricia's questions forced him to confront the complexity of what he was attempting. I don't know, he admitted. I just know that I can't pretend I never saw her. She's my daughter, and she's alone in the world. That has to mean something. It means everything, Patricia said gently, but it also means we need to proceed very carefully. This girl has built a life without you. If we approach this wrong, we could cause more harm than good. Patricia closed her portfolio and leaned forward. I'll take your case, Mr. Harrison, but with conditions. We do this slowly and ethically. No surprise confrontations, no dramatic revelations until we understand the full situation. My priority is the child's well-being, not your desire for absolution. I wouldn't want it any other way, Richard said. Good. Now, I'll need everything you can give me about Sarah Mitchell. Full name, date of birth, social security number if you have it, family members, friends, any detail you can remember. For the next hour, Richard dredged up memories he'd tried to suppress for years. Sarah's hometown in Pennsylvania, her parents who disapproved of their relationship, her dreams of becoming a music teacher, her favorite coffee shop near Columbia, where she'd spent hours studying. She was passionate about music education, Richard remembered suddenly. She used to say that every child deserved access to quality music instruction, regardless of their family's financial situation. She volunteered at community centers, teaching piano to kids whose families couldn't afford private lessons. Patricia's pen paused. That's important. People often continue patterns that were meaningful to them. If Sarah was passionate about music education, she likely continued that work wherever she settled. As they talked, a clearer picture of Sarah emerged. Not just the woman Richard had loved and lost, but the mother who had raised his daughter alone. Sarah's values, her priorities, her determination to make music accessible to everyone, all of these qualities had clearly been passed on to the girl playing piano in Grand Central Station. "There's something else you need to understand," Patricia said as their meeting wound down. "Even if we confirm this girl is your daughter, there's no guarantee she'll want a relationship with you. She's built her identity around being Sarah's daughter, not yours. You abandoned them before she was born. That's a significant betrayal to overcome." "I know," Richard said quietly, "but I have to try." Patricia gathered her materials and stood to leave. "I'll start with death records for Sarah Mitchell in the New York area. If she died 2 years ago, there will be documentation. From there, I can trace backwards to find where they lived, where your daughter went to school, who her guardians are now. How long will this take? For basic confirmation, a week or 2. For the full picture, we'll need to proceed safely. Could be months." After Patricia left, Richard sat alone in his office as Manhattan glittered in the darkness beyond his windows. For the first time in years, the view from his penthouse felt less like a symbol of achievement and more like a prison of his own making. Somewhere in the city below, his daughter was probably still playing piano, still struggling to survive while he lived in luxury built on the foundation of her abandonment. 2 days later, Patricia called with her first update. "I found her," she said without preamble. "Sarah Ann Mitchell died of complications from lupus at Mount Sinai Hospital on March 15th, 2 years ago. She was 39. Richard felt the air leave his lungs. Lupus. Sarah had battled an autoimmune disease while raising their daughter alone, working and fighting for her health with no support from the man who should have been beside her through it all. "There's more," Patricia continued. "Sarah listed her daughter as Maya Elena Mitchell on all the hospital paperwork. The girl is 16, born on June 8th. "June 8th, Richard interrupted, his voice broken. "That was our anniversary. Sarah and I met on June 8th during our first year at Columbia." Patricia's voice softened. "She named her daughter after you, Mr. Harrison. Maya is a variant of the Hebrew name Micah, which means who is like God, but it's also an anagram of your middle name, Adam." The revelation hit Richard like a thunderbolt. Even after all these years, even after he'd driven her away with his selfishness and ambition, Sarah had given their daughter a name that connected her to him. She'd kept some small part of their love alive in the most fundamental way possible. "Where is Maya living now?" Richard asked. "That's where things get complicated," Patricia said. "According to city records, Maya was placed in the foster care system after Sarah's death, but she aged out 6 months ago when she turned 16. Officially, she's considered an emancipated minor." "Foster care," Richard repeated the words, tasting like poison. His daughter had not only lost her mother, but had been shuffled through the system like unwanted cargo while he lived in ignorance just miles away. "I'm still tracking down details about her current living situation," Patricia continued. "But Mr. Harrison, I need to warn you, Maya's records indicate she's had some trouble with authorities. Truancy charges, loitering citations, and 1 arrest for busking without a permit." Richard closed his eyes, imagining his daughter navigating the bureaucratic nightmare of adolescence without family, without resources, without anyone to advocate for her well-being. She'd been forced to grow up too fast, to become self-reliant in ways no child should have to experience. "There's something else," Patricia said. "Maya's school records show exceptional academic performance and remarkable musical aptitude. Her teachers consistently noted her talent, but also mentioned concerns about her stability and support system. She missed a lot of school in her mother's final months, probably caring for Sarah during her illness." The picture Patricia painted was heartbreaking and heroic in equal measure. Maya had been not just a daughter, but a caregiver, sacrificing her own childhood to nurse her dying mother while maintaining academic excellence and developing extraordinary musical skills. "I want to help her," Richard said urgently. Whatever she needs, housing, education, medical care, anything. Slow down, Patricia cautioned. Remember what we discussed. Maya has survived by being independent and self-reliant. If you approach her with grand gestures and sudden offers of support, she's likely to be suspicious. Kids who've been through the system learn to be wary of adults bearing gifts. Then what do you suggest? Patricia was quiet for a moment, considering. We need to understand her daily routine, her support network, her immediate needs. Then we find ways to help that don't feel intrusive or threatening. Natural connections, organic opportunities. Like what? Give me another week, Patricia said. I'll shadow her, learn her patterns, identify the people in her life who care about her well-being. Then we'll develop a strategy that puts her comfort and agency first. As Richard hung up the phone, he stared once again at the photograph of Sarah, but now he saw it differently. Instead of just remembering the woman he'd lost, he saw the mother who had raised an extraordinary daughter despite impossible circumstances. Sarah had given Maya not just life, but strength, talent, and resilience that no amount of money could buy. His daughter was no longer just a fantasy or a regret. She was Maya Elena Mitchell, a remarkable young woman who had inherited her mother's musical gifts and her father's determination, even if she didn't know it yet. And somehow, Richard was going to find a way to be the father she deserved, even if it was 15 years too late to be the father she'd needed. Maya Elena Mitchell woke up at 5:30 a.m. in the cramped studio apartment she shared with 3 other teens in Washington Heights, the morning light filtering through windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in months. The building superintendent, Mrs. Rodriguez, had taken pity on her 6 months ago when she'd aged out of foster care, offering her a spot in an unofficial arrangement that kept 4 homeless teenagers off the streets. The apartment was barely legal. 1 room with a tiny kitchenette and a bathroom that required jiggling the handle to stop the toilet from running continuously. Maya slept on an air mattress in the corner, her few possessions stored in a duffel bag that had followed her through 7 different foster homes in 2 years. But it was hers, or at least her quarter of it, and after the instability of the system, having any space she could call home felt like a luxury. Her roommates were still asleep. Tommy, a 17-year-old who'd been kicked out for being gay and made money doing food delivery on his bicycle. Zara, a 15-year-old runaway from an abusive household who sold handmade jewelry in Washington Square Park. And Marcus, 18 and technically too old for the arrangement, who worked night shifts at a 24-hour diner and contributed most of their rent money. Maya moved quietly through her morning routine, careful not to wake the others. She showered quickly in their temperamental bathroom, dressed in her cleanest clothes, dark jeans and a navy sweater she'd found at a thrift store that almost looked professional, and packed her canvas messenger bag with sheet music, a worn, paperback copy of Les Miserables, and a granola bar that would serve as breakfast. By 6:15, she was on the subway heading downtown, the morning commute already beginning to swell with office workers and service employees starting their days. Maya had learned to navigate the city's rhythms like a native, understanding which train cars were least crowded, which stations had the best acoustics for busking, and which subway employees would look the other way when she set up her portable keyboard. Her first stop wasn't Grand Central, where Richard had discovered her, but the Times Square station, a tourist-heavy location where her classical repertoire stood out among the usual street performers. Maya had claimed a spot near the entrance to the NQR lines, an area with decent foot traffic and acoustics that made her music carry without being overwhelming. She unfolded her portable keyboard stand, a lightweight aluminum frame she'd bought, second-hand from another busker who was moving to Los Angeles, and carefully positioned her Yamaha P45, a digital piano that had been her mother's final gift to her. Sarah had somehow scraped together the money for it during her last weeks, insisting that Maya needed a proper instrument, even if they could barely afford groceries. The keyboard wasn't professional grade, but it had weighted keys that felt closer to a real piano than most alternatives, and more importantly, it was reliable. Maya had learned to baby it, protecting it from rain with plastic sheeting and handling it with the reverence usually reserved for priceless artifacts. As the morning rush intensified, Maya began with Pachelbel's Canon in D, a piece that was recognizable, enough to catch attention, but sophisticated enough to demonstrate her skill. Her fingers moved with practiced confidence across the keys, her body swaying slightly as she lost herself in the familiar patterns. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered. Maya had learned to read her audience. The businessman who always dropped a $5 bill and requested Chopin, the college student who lingered during Bach and left whatever change she had, the elderly woman who came by twice a week and always asked for something cheerful. "Could you play some Debussy?" asked a voice Maya recognized. She looked up to see Dr. Elizabeth Hartman, a music professor from NYU who had become one of Maya's regular supporters over the past few months. "Of course," Maya replied, transitioning smoothly into Claire de Lune. Dr. Hartman was one of the few people who treated Maya's busking as legitimate musical performance rather than charity case entertainment. Dr. Hartman listened for several minutes before approaching Maya's keyboard case, which served as her tip collection. Instead of dropping money, she handed Maya a business card. "There's a master class this Saturday at the university," Dr. Hartman said quietly. "Guest artist from the Vienna Conservatory. I spoke to the department head about you. They're willing to let you audit the session if you're interested." Maya's fingers stumbled slightly on the keys. Opportunities like this were rare and precious, but they also came with complications. "Is there a cost?" "Not for auditing. Just show up with your music and be prepared to listen and learn." Maya nodded, tucking the card carefully into her bag. "Thank you. I'll be there." Dr. Hartman dropped a $20 bill into the case and moved on, but not before saying, "You have extraordinary talent, Maya. Don't let the world convince you otherwise." As the morning progressed, Maya's mind wandered between the music and the constant calculations that dominated her daily life. She'd made $38 so far, enough to contribute her share of this week's groceries and maybe put a few dollars aside for the laundromat. If the afternoon session at Grand Central went well, she might even be able to buy new strings for the guitar Marcus had been trying to repair. The arrangement with her roommates worked because they all understood the hustle required to survive. On the margins, they shared resources when possible, covered for each other when necessary, and maintained the careful balance between friendship and survival that characterized relationships among street-smart teenagers. Maya's phone buzzed with, "A text from Zara, ran out of coffee. Can you grab some on way home?" followed by a string of pleading emoji. Maya smiled and texted back, "If today goes well," then added her own emoji, a musical note, and a crossed fingers symbol. By noon, Maya had earned $63 and decided to move to her Grand Central spot for the lunch crowd. The tourist traffic at Times Square was good for quantity, but Grand Central brought quality, commuters who appreciated classical music and had more disposable income. She packed up her equipment with the efficiency born of daily practice, navigating the subway system with her portable keyboard like a seasoned professional roadie. Other buskers nodded respectfully as she passed. Maya had earned her place in the informal hierarchy of street performers through consistency, talent, and respect for territorial boundaries. Grand Central's main concourse was bustling with lunch hour energy when Maya set up in her usual spot near the information booth. The acoustics here were spectacular, with the vaulted ceiling amplifying her music in ways that made her modest keyboard sound fuller and richer. She began with Bach's invention, Number 1, a piece that showcased technical skill while being accessible to casual listeners. Within minutes, the familiar rhythm of her workday resumed, commuters pausing to listen, tourists taking photos, the steady accumulation of bills and coins that represented not just money, but validation that her music mattered to people. Maya was deep into a Chopin nocturne when she noticed a man in an expensive suit standing at the edge of her audience. He'd been there for several minutes, she realized, listening with an intensity that made her slightly uncomfortable. She'd learned to be wary of men who paid too much attention, who lingered too long, who seemed more interested in her than her music. But this man was different. He wasn't staring at her in the predatory way that sometimes made her pack up early and find a different location. Instead, he seemed almost sad. His eyes held a pain that Maya recognized from her own mirror during the months after her mother's. A death. When she finished the nocturne, the man stepped forward and dropped a $100 bill into her case, the same gesture that had caught her attention several days earlier. Maya looked up, meeting his eyes directly for the second time. "Thank you," she said simply, the same words she'd offered before. "You're even more talented than I remembered," he replied, his voice rough with emotion Maya couldn't identify. Something about his tone made Maya study his face more carefully. He was probably in his early 40s, with dark hair that was beginning to show grey at the temples and eyes that seemed familiar in a way she couldn't place. There was something about his features, the shape of his nose, the line of his jaw, that triggered a vague sense of recognition. "Do we know each other?" Maya asked, her fingers still resting on the keys. The man seemed to struggle with the question, opening his mouth as if to speak before closing it again. "I don't think so," he said finally. I appreciate good music." Maya nodded, accepting the explanation, even though something felt incomplete about it. She'd learned not to push when adults seemed uncomfortable. Too many foster homes had taught her that curiosity could be dangerous. "Is there something you'd like to hear?" she asked instead. The man considered for a moment. "Do you know any Schumann? Träumerei, perhaps?" Maya's eyebrows rose slightly. Träumerei wasn't a common request. It was a beautiful but relatively obscure piece that required genuine musical knowledge to appreciate fully. Most of her audience requested pieces they'd heard in movies or commercials. "Of course," she said, and began the gentle, dreamlike melody that had been one of her mother's favorites. As she played, Maya noticed that the man's eyes had filled with tears. He stood perfectly still, listening with the focused attention of someone for whom the music carried deep personal meaning. When she finished, he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, looking embarrassed. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "Your mother taught you well." The comment about her mother caught Maya off guard. She'd mentioned Sarah to him briefly during their first encounter, but his phrasing suggested something more personal than casual interest. "Did you know her?" Maya asked, her voice carefully neutral. The man seemed to realize he'd revealed more than he'd intended. "No, I could tell from the way you spoke about her that she was special." Maya studied his face, looking for clues about what he wasn't saying. But before she could ask more questions, her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Emergency at apartment. Mrs. R needs to talk to all of us. Can you come home early?" Maya's stomach dropped. Emergency meetings with their superintendent usually meant bad news. Complaints from other tenants, problems with the lease, threats of eviction. Their living arrangement existed in a legal grey area that could collapse at any moment. "I have to go," Maya said, already beginning to pack up her equipment. "Is everything all right?" the man asked, his concern seeming genuine. "Just roommate stuff," Maya replied, not wanting to share the details of her precarious living situation. "With a stranger." As she folded up her keyboard stand, the man hesitated, as if wanting to say something more. Instead, he simply said, "Take care of yourself." Maya nodded and hurried toward the subway, her mind already racing ahead to whatever crisis was waiting at home. She didn't notice that the man followed at a distance, watching until she disappeared into the crowd, his face etched with worry and longing. Richard Harrison stood alone in Grand Central Station, surrounded by hundreds of strangers, feeling more isolated than he had in 15 years. His daughter was walking away from him again, and once more he was powerless to help her with the challenges she faced. But this time, he wasn't going to let distance and silence define their relationship. This time, he was going to find a way to be there for her, even if she never knew who he really was. Maya's heart pounded as she climbed the 4 flights of stairs to their apartment, the portable keyboard case seeming heavier with each step. Emergency meetings with Mrs. Rodriguez never brought good news, and Maya's mind raced through possibilities: noise complaints from other tenants, city inspectors discovering their overcrowded living situation, or worst of all, eviction. She found her 3 roommates clustered around their tiny kitchen table, their faces grim. Mrs. Rodriguez, a sturdy woman in her 60s with steel-grey hair and kind but tired eyes, sat across from them holding an official-looking document. "Maya, good, you're here," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her accented English heavy with worry. "Sit down, Mija, we need to talk." Maya set down her keyboard case and squeezed into the remaining chair, automatically reaching for Marcus's hand under the table. At 18, Marcus had become the unofficial leader of their little family, the one who negotiated with landlords and handled the more complicated aspects of their living arrangement. "What's happening?" Maya asked, though she could already see the answer in the tension radiating from everyone in the room. Mrs. Rodriguez held up the document. "A building inspection notice. The city is doing a full review of the property next week. They're looking for code violations, occupancy limits, everything." Maya's stomach dropped. Their arrangement, 4 teenagers crammed into a studio apartment, meant for one person, was definitely not legal. If the inspectors discovered their living situation, they'd all be back on the streets within days. "How much time do we have?" Tommy asked, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by the hard-edged survival instincts that had kept him alive since his parents kicked him out. "1 week, Mrs. Rodriguez replied. "I've been trying to think of solutions, but—" She gestured helplessly around the cramped space. "There's no way to hide that 4 people are living here." Zara, the youngest at 15, started crying quietly. Maya reached across the table and took her hand, offering what comfort she could, while her own mind spiraled through increasingly desperate scenarios. "We could find somewhere else," Marcus suggested, but they all knew it wasn't that simple. Affordable housing in New York City was nearly impossible to find, especially for teenagers with no credit history, no parental guarantees, and only sporadic income. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice thick with genuine regret. "You kids have been good tenants, respectful and quiet, but if the city finds you here during the inspection, they'll shut down the whole building. I could lose everything." Maya understood. Mrs. Rodriguez had taken a huge risk sheltering them, motivated by kindness rather than profit. The older woman had her own family to protect, her own financial struggles to navigate. "We'll figure something out," Maya said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "We always do." But as Mrs. Rodriguez left and the 4 teenagers sat in stunned silence, Maya wondered if their luck had finally run out. They'd survived this long through a combination of street smarts, mutual support, and sheer determination. But housing was the one challenge that couldn't be solved through hustle and creativity. "Maybe we could find 2 smaller places," Tommy suggested half-heartedly, "split into pairs." "With what money?" Zara asked, wiping her eyes. "Even the worst studios in the outer boroughs are $1,500 a month. That's almost double what we're paying here." Marcus was already pulling out his phone, scrolling through rental listings they all knew they couldn't afford. Maya watched him search with increasing desperation, the numbers on the screen representing impossible dreams rather than actual options. "I could ask around at work," Marcus offered. "Maybe someone knows about a place." "And I could check with the other buskers," Maya added. "Sometimes people hear about situations." But even as they made plans and tried to maintain hope, Maya could see the fear in everyone's eyes. They'd all been homeless before finding this arrangement, and the memory of sleeping in subway stations, youth shelters, and abandoned buildings was still fresh enough to wake them up with nightmares. "We should pack tonight," Maya said, practically. "Get our important stuff ready to move quickly if we need to." The next few hours passed in subdued activity as they sorted through their few possessions, deciding what was essential and what could be left behind. Maya carefully wrapped her sheet music and her mother's few remaining personal items: a silver locket, a photo of Sarah playing piano at a college recital, and a letter Sarah had written to Maya for her 16th birthday but hadn't lived to deliver. As evening approached, Maya realized she needed air, space to think without the crushing weight of their shared anxiety. She grabbed her jacket and headed for the building's roof access, a privilege Mrs. Rodriguez allowed them as long as they were careful and quiet. The Washington Heights rooftop offered a spectacular view of Manhattan, the city lights stretching endlessly in every direction, like a constellation of dreams and possibilities. Maya had spent countless hours up here, especially during the first weeks after aging out of foster care, when the adjustment to independence had felt overwhelming. She was sitting on the ledge, legs dangling over the side, when footsteps announced Marcus's arrival. "Figured I'd find you up here," he said, settling beside her with a grunt of exhaustion. "Just thinking," Maya replied, not taking her eyes off the city skyline. "About what we're going to do, about what we always do. Survive." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You know, sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have a normal problem, like worrying about homework or dating or college applications, instead of whether we'll have a place to sleep next week." Maya smiled sadly. "I used to think about that when I was in foster care. All those families on TV shows with their regular problems, teenagers arguing with parents about curfews or allowances. It seemed so simple." "Your mum never talked about your father?" Marcus asked. It was a question he'd asked before, but gently, understanding that Maya's past was full of sensitive territory. "Never," Maya said. "I asked when I was little, but she'd get this look, not angry, just sad. Like it hurt too much to talk about. Eventually I stopped asking. Think he even knows you exist?" Maya had wondered the same thing countless times. Mum kept all her important papers in a box under her bed: birth certificate, social security card, medical records. My father's name isn't on the birth certificate, just says unknown. That's cold. Or protective, Maya said thoughtfully. Maybe she was protecting me from someone who didn't want us, or protecting him from responsibility he wasn't ready for. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city pulse with life below them. Maya found herself thinking about the man. From Grand Central Station, his emotional response to her music, his comment about her mother, the way he'd looked at her with something that felt almost like recognition. "There's something weird going on," Maya said suddenly, "besides the eviction thing. This guy who's been showing up when I play, expensive suit, obviously rich. He's been there twice now, and both times he seemed really emotional. About the music, like it meant something personal to him." Marcus straightened, his protective instincts engaging. "You think he's some kind of creep?" "No, not like that. It's different. He asked specifically for this obscure Schumann piece that most people have never heard of. And when I mentioned my mum teaching me, he said she must have been special, like he was sad about it. Maybe he lost someone too. Music can be like that. Brings back memories." Maya nodded, but something nagged at her about the encounter. The man's face had seemed familiar in a way she couldn't explain, and his comment about her mother had felt too specific for a casual observation. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Maya, this is Dr. Hartman from NYU. I wanted to follow up about the masterclass Saturday. Would you like me to arrange transportation? I could pick you up if needed." Maya showed the message to Marcus, who whistled softly. "Free ride to a fancy music class? That's awesome." "It's also weird," Maya said. "College professors don't usually offer personal transportation to random street musicians." "Maybe she's just being nice, or maybe she sees something special in you." Maya stared at the message, torn between opportunity and suspicion. In her experience, adults who offered help usually wanted something in return. But Dr. Hartman had been nothing but supportive, and the masterclass could be an incredible learning experience. "I'm going to say yes," Maya decided, typing back a grateful acceptance. As they prepared to head back downstairs, Marcus stopped Maya with a hand on her arm. "Hey, whatever happens with the apartment situation, we stick together, okay? We're family now. Not the kind you're born into, but the kind you choose." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. "Yeah, we are." Downstairs, they found Tommy and Zara asleep on the air mattresses, exhausted by stress and uncertainty. Maya settled into her corner, pulling a thin blanket over herself as she stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine where they'd all be sleeping. A week from now, somewhere across the city, Richard Harrison sat in his penthouse office, staring at reports Patricia Chen had compiled about Maya's living situation. The investigator had been thorough. Too thorough for Richard's peace of mind. Learning that his daughter was essentially homeless, surviving through the generosity of an overworked superintendent and the solidarity of other displaced teenagers, made him feel physically sick. Patricia had recommended caution, strategic planning, careful approaches that wouldn't frighten Maya or compromise her autonomy. But reading about the building inspection and imminent eviction, Richard found his patience with cautious strategies evaporating. His daughter was about to be homeless. While he debated ethics and approaches, Maya was facing another night of uncertainty. But where she'd sleep the following week, Richard picked up his phone and dialed Patricia's number. "I need options," he said, without preamble when she answered. "Not in a month, not in a week. Now." "Mr. Harrison, we discussed." "My daughter is about to be evicted," Richard interrupted. "Whatever long-term strategy you're developing, it won't matter if she's sleeping in subway stations next week." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "What are you proposing?" "I don't know yet," Richard admitted, "but I'm done watching from the sidelines. While she struggles, it's time to act." As he hung up the phone, Richard made a decision that would change everything. Caution and patience were luxuries his daughter couldn't afford. Whether Maya knew who he was or not, she was going to get the help she needed, even if it meant revealing secrets that had been buried for 15 years. Patricia Chen arrived at Richard's penthouse at 7 a.m. sharp, carrying a thick manila folder and wearing the grim expression of someone about to deliver unwelcome news. Richard had barely slept, spending the night pacing his apartment and staring out at the city where his daughter was facing homelessness while he lived in luxury. "I have a plan," Patricia said without preamble, settling into the leather chair, across from Richard's desk. "But you're not going to like it. Tell me." Patricia opened her folder and spread several documents across the mahogany surface. "Maya's building situation is worse than we initially thought. The inspection isn't random. There have been multiple complaints about overcrowding and safety violations. The city is looking to make an example." Richard's jaw tightened. "How long does she have?" 5 days, maybe less. "But here's what I've discovered. There's a network of support around Maya that she's not even aware of. Dr. Hartman at NYU has been advocating for her behind the scenes. The supervisor at Grand Central Station has been protecting her busking spot from other performers who want to claim it. Even some of her regular listeners have been coordinating to make sure she earns enough each day. A network? People recognize her talent and want to help, but they're all working independently. Maya's too proud to accept direct charity, so they've been finding indirect ways to support her. Patricia pulled out a photograph, Maya playing piano in Grand Central, surrounded by a small crowd of regular commuters. Richard recognized several faces, people he'd seen listening to her play during his own visits. "This is good," Richard said slowly. "It means people care about her welfare." "It also means we have allies," Patricia continued. "People who want Maya to succeed, but respect her independence. If we're going to help her, we need to work through this existing network rather than trying to replace it." Richard studied the documents, his mind racing through possibilities. "What are you proposing?" Patricia leaned forward, her expression serious. "Anonymous intervention. We solve her immediate problems without revealing who's behind the help. Housing first, then educational opportunities, then longer-term support. All of it structured to look like luck, scholarships, and coincidence." "How?" "I've found a small apartment building in Morningside Heights. The owner is a retired music teacher named Eleanor Walsh, who's been trying to rent a one-bedroom unit to someone who'll appreciate the building's history. It used to be housing for Juilliard students in the 1960s. Richard felt a spark of hope. Would she rent to Maya? Not under normal circumstances. Maya has no rental history, no guarantees. But Mrs. Walsh has a soft spot for young musicians. If someone were to approach her with Maya's story, along with a year's rent paid in advance, and a compelling case for why this particular apartment should go to this particular girl, she might say yes. More than that, Mrs. Walsh has connections. Throughout the classical music community, living in that building would put Maya in contact with serious musicians, teachers, and opportunities she can't access from Washington Heights. Richard was already reaching for his checkbook. "How much?" "Slow down," Patricia cautioned. "We need to be strategic about this. Maya can't know the money came from you, and she needs to believe she earned this opportunity. Otherwise, her pride will make her refuse." Patricia pulled out another document, a flyer for a music scholarship competition. The Hartwell Foundation awards housing grants to young musicians demonstrating exceptional talent and financial need. It's a legitimate program, though they typically don't accept applications from street performers. But they might make an exception. They might, especially if someone were to make a substantial donation to their endowment fund, enough to create a new category specifically for non-traditional musical education. Richard understood immediately. "I fund the scholarship anonymously. Maya applies and wins based on her actual talent, and she gets the apartment without knowing I was involved." "Exactly. She earns it legitimately, which protects her dignity and gives her ownership of the achievement." Patricia spread out more papers, bank statements, tax documents, scholarship applications. "It gets more complex. We also need to address her educational situation. Maya's been out of school for months, focusing on survival rather than academics, but her transcripts show exceptional ability, and Dr. Hartman has been pushing for her to apply to college programs." "What kind of programs?" "Music education, with full scholarships available for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Maya could complete her high school equivalency while starting college courses, but only if she has stable housing and support." Richard felt overwhelmed by the complexity of what Patricia was proposing, but also impressed by her thoroughness. This wasn't just about solving Maya's immediate crisis. It was about creating a pathway for her to build the life she deserved. "There's one more component," Patricia said quietly. "Maya's roommates, Tommy, Zara, and Marcus, are also going to be homeless next week. If we help Maya but abandon them, we're essentially breaking up the only family she has." Richard hadn't considered this aspect, but Patricia was right. Maya's loyalty to her chosen family was obvious, and she'd never accept help that left them behind. Can we extend the program? Not housing. That would look suspicious. But the Hartwell Foundation could expand their mission to include community outreach programs for homeless youth. Job training, educational support, temporary housing assistance. It would help Maya's friends while giving Maya a way to remain connected to them. Richard was quiet for several minutes, absorbing the scope of what Patricia was proposing. It wasn't just about helping Maya. It was about creating an entire support ecosystem that could transform multiple lives while maintaining the illusion of coincidence and merit. How long will this take to set up? 72 hours. If we move fast, I'll need authorization to make substantial financial commitments on your behalf, and you'll need to stay completely invisible throughout the process. What does that mean? Patricia's expression grew stern. No more visits to Grand Central Station. No more contact with Maya until this is all in place. If she starts to suspect that someone specific is orchestrating her good fortune, the whole plan falls apart. The thought of not seeing Maya for several days, especially knowing she was facing such uncertainty, made Richard's chest tighten. But he understood the logic. "Fine," he said. "What do you need from me?" Patricia pulled out a legal document. Power of attorney for the specific purpose of establishing charitable foundations and making educational donations. Also, a substantial wire transfer to get things started. How substantial? $2 million initially. More if the program expands successfully. Richard didn't hesitate. Done. As Patricia gathered her materials to begin implementing their plan, Richard felt a mixture of excitement and terror. He was about to intervene in his daughter's life in the most dramatic way possible, but she would never know he was responsible. "Patricia," he said as she reached the door, "what if this doesn't work? What if Maya figures out what's happening?" Patricia paused, considering the question carefully. "Then we adapt. But Mr. Harrison, your daughter has been surviving on her own for 2 years. She's resourceful, intelligent, and strong. Trust those qualities to guide her toward the opportunities we're creating." After Patricia left, Richard stood at his office, windows overlooking the city, knowing that somewhere in the urban maze below, Maya was probably already preparing for another day of busking, unaware that her life was about to change forever. Meanwhile, Maya was indeed getting ready for her daily routine, but with a heavy heart. The apartment felt different now, charged with the anxiety of impending displacement. Tommy had barely slept, tossing and turning on his air mattress. Zara had woken up crying from a nightmare about being back on the streets. Marcus was already on his phone, desperately calling every contact he had who might know about housing options. "I have an idea," Maya announced as she packed her keyboard case. "What if we split up temporarily, just until we can find somewhere for all of us to be together again?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "We stay together. That's how we've survived this long." "But if it's the only way, there has to be another option," Tommy interrupted. "Maybe we could find someone else willing to take the risk Mrs. Rodriguez can't." Maya wanted to believe there were solutions, but she'd learned not to count on miracles. Still, she had her performance at the NYU masterclass tomorrow, and Dr. Hartman's continued support gave her hope that maybe, somehow, opportunities existed beyond what she could currently see. As she headed for the subway, Maya made a decision. Whatever happened with their housing situation, she wasn't going to let fear paralyze her. She'd keep playing, keep looking for opportunities, keep believing that music could somehow be the key to a better future. She had no idea that her faith was about to be rewarded in ways she never could have imagined, orchestrated by someone who'd been searching for her his entire adult life. Saturday morning arrived grey and drizzling, the kind of October weather that made New York City feel both romantic and melancholy. Maya stood outside the imposing stone facade of NYU's Steinhardt School, clutching her worn messenger bag and feeling completely out of place among the well-dressed students streaming through the entrance. Dr. Hartman had picked her up in Washington, Heights as promised, driving a modest Honda that smelled faintly of coffee and sheet music. During the 40-minute drive through Manhattan traffic, she'd explained what Maya could expect from the master class. Professor Andreas Kellner is one of the most respected piano pedagogues in Europe, Dr. Hartman had said, navigating through a maze of construction barriers. He's taught at Vienna Conservatory for 20 years, and his students regularly win international competitions. This is an extraordinary opportunity, Maya. Now, standing in the marble-floored lobby of the music building, Maya wondered if she'd made a mistake. Students chatted in small groups, their conversations peppered with references to compositions, techniques, and opportunities that existed in a world far removed from subway stations and busking for grocery money. Second thoughts? Dr. Hartman asked gently, appearing at Maya's elbow with 2 cups of coffee from the lobby cafe. Just overwhelmed, Maya admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. Everyone here seems so sophisticated, so prepared. Talent doesn't require sophistication, Dr. Hartman said firmly. Some of the most moving performances I've ever witnessed came from musicians who learned outside traditional conservatory settings. You have something these students are still trying to develop, authentic emotional connection to your music. They made their way to Lecture Hall B, a tiered amphitheater with excellent acoustics and a magnificent Steinway grand piano positioned center stage. About 60 people filled the seats, mostly college students, but also several adults who Maya assumed were faculty members and serious music enthusiasts. Professor Kellner was a distinguished man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of precise posture that spoke of decades spent at piano benches. He spoke with a slight German accent, his voice carrying easily through the hall without amplification. Today, we will explore the emotional architecture of romantic piano literature, he began, his hands moving expressively as he spoke. Technique serves emotion, not the reverse. The greatest pianists understand that every note must carry meaning, must serve the larger narrative of the piece. For the next hour, Maya found herself completely absorbed as Professor Kellner demonstrated concepts on the Steinway, his playing revealing layers of meaning in familiar pieces she'd never noticed before. He had several student volunteers perform brief passages, offering corrections that transformed good playing into something transcendent. Music education in conservatories can sometimes create technically proficient but emotionally sterile performers, Professor Kellner said during a pause between demonstrations. The challenge is maintaining the passion that drew you to music, while developing the skills to express that passion with clarity and precision. Maya felt as if he was speaking directly to her. This was exactly the balance she'd been trying to achieve through her self-directed learning, maintaining the emotional connection her mother had taught her while pushing her technical abilities forward through practice and study. Now, Professor Kellner said, scanning the audience, I would like to invite someone to play who has not been formally trained in conservatory methods. Sometimes we can learn the most from musicians who have found their own path to expression. Dr. Hartman leaned over and whispered, This is your moment, Maya. Maya's heart began racing. I couldn't, not in front of all these people. You play for strangers every day in the subway, Dr. Hartman pointed out gently. This is just a different kind of audience. Before Maya could protest further, Dr. Hartman was raising her hand. Professor Kellner, I have a student here who fits that description perfectly. Professor Kellner's eyes found Maya in the audience. Wonderful. Please come down and introduce yourself. Maya's legs felt unsteady as she made her way down the tiered steps to the stage, aware of dozens of eyes following her progress. The Steinway seemed impossibly grand and intimidating compared to her portable keyboard or the beaten-up pianos she usually played. "What is your name, and where have you studied?" Professor Kellner asked kindly. "Maya Mitchell," she said, her voice barely carrying beyond the front rows. "I haven't studied anywhere formal. My mother taught me when I was young, and I've been learning on my own since she died." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the audience. Professor Kellner's expression grew more gentle. "I am sorry for your loss. Music can be both comfort and connection to those we have lost. What would you like to play for us?" Maya thought for a moment. "Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, if that's all right." "An excellent choice. Please, take your time to get comfortable." With the instrument, Maya approached the Steinway bench, adjusting the height and testing the action of the keys. The instrument was perfectly maintained, responsive in ways that made her portable keyboard feel like a child's toy by comparison. She closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of her mother's hands, guiding hers through this same piece years ago. When she began to play, the difference was immediately apparent to everyone in the room. This wasn't the careful, studied performance of a conservatory student trying to demonstrate technical mastery. This was music flowing from deep personal experience, every phrase shaped by loss, hope, and the kind of resilience that only comes from genuine hardship. The Nocturne had always been one of Maya's favorites, but playing it on the Steinway revealed colors and subtleties she'd never been able to access before. The instrument seemed to amplify not just the volume, but the emotional content of every note, creating a conversation between Maya's inner world and Chopin's timeless melody. Professor Kellner watched intently, occasionally nodding or making small gestures that suggested he was following not just Maya's technique, but her musical thinking. The audience sat in complete silence, drawn into the intimate world Maya was creating through her performance. When she reached the piece's gentle conclusion, the silence stretched for several heartbeats before applause filled the hall. But it wasn't the polite appreciation usually offered to student performances. This was the kind of sustained, emotional response reserved for truly moving musical experiences. "Thank you," Professor Kellner said, his voice thick with emotion. "That was remarkable. Please, stay at the piano for a moment." Maya looked up at him uncertainly, her hands still resting on the keys. "You have something very rare, Professor," Kellner continued, addressing both Maya and the audience. "Technical skill can be taught, but the ability to find the emotional core of a piece and communicate it directly to listeners, that is a gift that cannot be manufactured." He moved closer to the piano, his voice growing more intense. "Your phrasing in the middle section, the way you shape the melodic line, where did you learn to do that?" I just listened to how the music wanted to sound," Maya said quietly. "My mother always said that the music would tell me what it needed if I paid attention. Your mother was a wise teacher. What you just demonstrated is what we call musical intuition, and it typically takes years of study to develop. You seem to have accessed it naturally." Professor Kellner turned to address the full audience. "This is why I encourage students to listen to musicians from outside academic settings. Sometimes the most profound musical insights come from those who approach the art with fresh ears and open hearts." After the formal session ended, Professor Kellner approached Maya directly. "I wonder if I might speak with you privately for a few minutes?" Maya nodded, following him to a smaller practice room adjacent to the lecture hall. Dr. Hartman came with them, her expression suggesting she knew something Maya didn't. "Maya," Professor Kellner began, settling into a chair across from her, "have you considered formal musical education?" "I've thought about it," Maya admitted, "but college is expensive, and I'm not sure I have the background to succeed in a competitive program." Professor Kellner exchanged a meaningful look with Dr. Hartman. "What if I told you that wouldn't be a problem? That there are ways to pursue serious musical education even without traditional preparation?" "I'm not sure what you mean." Dr. Hartman leaned forward. Maya, there's something we need to tell you. Professor Kellner didn't just happen to be doing a masterclass here today. I contacted him specifically because I wanted him to hear you play. Maya felt a familiar wariness creep in. Why? Because I believe you have the potential for a professional musical career, but you need proper training and support to develop that potential, Dr. Hartman said. And because there are people in the musical community who want to help talented young musicians, especially those who haven't had access to traditional opportunities. Professor Kellner nodded. There is a scholarship program I'm familiar with, the Hartwell Foundation. They provide comprehensive support for exceptional musicians from non-traditional backgrounds, housing, education, mentorship, performance. Opportunities? Maya's pulse quickened. What kind of support? Complete support, Dr. Hartman said. An apartment near campus, full tuition coverage, a living stipend, and access to private instruction with some of the finest teachers in the city. But I don't understand, Maya said slowly. Why would they give all that to someone like me? Professor E. Kellner smiled. Because someone like you is exactly what they're looking for. Your performance today demonstrated not just talent, but the kind of musical maturity that can't be taught. You have the raw materials of greatness, Maya. You just need the right environment to develop them. Dr. Hartman pulled out a folder. The application deadline is next week, but we can help you prepare everything you need. Transcripts, recommendations, a performance audition. Maya stared at the application materials, afraid to hope. What's the catch? No catch, Professor Kellner said gently. Just a community of musicians who believe in nurturing talent wherever it's found. As Maya left NYU that afternoon, her mind was spinning with possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. A real apartment, formal education, mentorship from world-class musicians. It seemed too good to be true. But Dr. Hartman's sincerity was obvious, and Professor Kellner had no reason to mislead her. Maybe, just maybe, her mother's faith that music would eventually provide a path forward was finally proving true. She had no idea that several blocks away, Richard Harrison was sitting in his office, receiving updates from Patricia Chen about the Hartwell Foundation's newly expanded mission and the promising young musician who would soon become their first scholarship recipient. The invisible threads of connection were finally beginning to weave Maya's story toward the future. Sarah had always dreamed for her daughter, a future where talent, not circumstances, would determine her possibilities. Maya returned to the Washington Heights apartment that evening, with her mind reeling from the day's events, but her excitement was immediately tempered by the reality waiting for her. The eviction notice was still taped to their door, and her roommates were huddled around Tommy's laptop, desperately scrolling through housing listings they couldn't afford. How did it go? Marcus asked, looking up from a Craigslist search that showed nothing under $2,000 a month. It was incredible, Maya said, setting down her messenger bag. But listen, there might be something even more incredible coming. She told them about the masterclass, Professor Kellner's response to her performance, and the scholarship opportunity with the Hartwell Foundation. As she spoke, she watched their faces cycle through disbelief, hope, and finally, a kind of careful excitement tempered by years of disappointment. Housing included? Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Complete support, Maya confirmed. Apartment, tuition, living expenses, everything. Tommy leaned back against the wall, running, his hands through his hair. Maya, that's amazing. But what about us? If you get this scholarship, you won't need to live here anymore. The question Maya had been dreading hung in the air between them. She'd been so caught up in the possibility of her own future that she hadn't fully considered what it would mean for the family she'd chosen. We'll figure something out, Maya said quickly. Maybe there are other programs, other opportunities. Dr. Hartman mentioned that the Hartwell Foundation is expanding their mission. To include street kids with no particular talents, Marcus asked. not unkindly, but with the pragmatism born of hard experience. Maya didn't have an answer for that. She sat down on her air mattress, suddenly feeling guilty about the hope that had been building in her chest. How could she celebrate a possible escape when the people she cared about most would be left behind? "You have to apply," Zara said firmly, surprising everyone. "Maya, you can't pass up this chance because of us. We're survivors. We've made it this far, and we'll keep making it." "But we're supposed to stick together," Maya protested. "And we will," Marcus said. "But not if it means holding you back from something that could change your entire life. Your mom would want you to take this opportunity." The mention of her mother made Maya's eyes fill with tears. Sarah had sacrificed everything to give Maya a foundation in music, working multiple jobs while battling illness to pay for piano lessons and sheet music. Would she really want Maya to pass up a chance at formal education out of loyalty to friends? "I'll apply," Maya said finally. "But I'm not going anywhere until we figure out what happens to you three." The next morning brought an unexpected development. Maya was preparing for her usual Grand Central session when her phone rang with an unknown number. "Maya Mitchell?" The voice was crisp, professional, female. "Yes, this is Maya. My name is Catherine Walsh. I'm with the Hartwell Foundation. Dr. Hartman from NYU recommended that I contact you directly about our scholarship program." Maya's heart began racing. "Oh, okay. I understand you're interested in our comprehensive support program for non-traditional musical students." "Yes, very much so." "Excellent. I'd like to schedule an interview and audition for this week if possible. We're operating on an accelerated timeline due to some recent changes in our funding structure." Maya found herself gripping the phone tighter. "How accelerated?" "If you're selected, we could have you moved into housing and enrolled in classes within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Maya's mind spun with the implications. That's very fast. The music world moves quickly, Miss Mitchell. Opportunities come and go. Those who are ready to seize them succeed. Those who hesitate often miss their chance." There was something in Catherine Walsh's tone that made Maya slightly uncomfortable, a pushiness that didn't quite match the supportive approach Dr. Hartman had described. But maybe that was just how professional foundations operated. "I'd like to schedule the interview," Maya said. "Wonderful. How about tomorrow at 2 p.m.? I can send you the address." After hanging up, Maya sat staring at her phone, trying to process how quickly things were moving. Yesterday, she'd been facing homelessness, and now she was potentially days away from a complete life transformation. Her phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Walsh containing an address on the Upper East Side. Maya looked it up online. A luxury office building in one of Manhattan's most expensive neighborhoods. The Hartwell Foundation clearly had serious resources. That afternoon, Maya's busking session at Grand Central was interrupted by another surprise. She was midway through a Bach invention when she noticed a familiar figure standing at the edge of her audience, the mysterious man in the expensive suit who'd been showing up at her performances. This time, however, he seemed different, less composed, more agitated. He kept checking his phone and looking around nervously, as if he were waiting for something or someone. Maya finished her piece and decided to approach him directly. Something about his presence had been nagging at her for days, and she was tired of wondering about his motivations. "Excuse me," she said, stepping away from her keyboard. "I don't mean to be rude, but you've been coming to my performances for a while now. Is there something I can help you with?" The man looked startled, as if he hadn't expected her to confront him directly. Up close, Maya could see that he was younger than she'd initially thought, probably early 40s, with kind eyes that seemed somehow familiar. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I really enjoy your music." "Most people who enjoy my music drop a tip and move on," Maya observed. "You stand there like You're waiting for something. The man seemed to struggle with how to respond. You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who was very important to me. Your wife? No, not my wife. The man paused, looking as if he were wrestling with whether to say more. Someone I lost a long time ago. Your music. It brings back memories. Maya studied his face, trying to place the nagging sense of familiarity. What was her name? Sarah, the man said quietly. Her name was Sarah. Maya's breath caught. Sarah Mitchell? The man's eyes widened with shock. You knew her? She was my mother. For a moment they stared at each other in stunned silence. Maya's mind raced through possibilities. Was this man one of her mother's friends? A former colleague? Someone from the mysterious past her mother had never talked about? Your mother, the man repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah Mitchell was your mother. Yes. She died 2 years ago. The man's face crumpled with genuine grief. I'm so sorry, I didn't know. How did you know my mom? Maya asked, but before the man could answer, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Catherine Walsh. I need to take this, Maya said apologetically. Maya, Catherine Walsh's voice was urgent. There's been a change in your interview schedule. Can you come in today instead of tomorrow? We've had a cancellation, and I'd like to move quickly on your application. Maya glanced at the man, who was still standing there looking shell-shocked. I'm not sure. I was hoping to prepare more thoroughly. Preparation is important, but spontaneity can be equally valuable in musical performance, Catherine said. Besides, from what Dr. Hartman tells me, you're already more prepared than most applicants. Okay, Maya decided. I can be there in an hour. Perfect. I'll see you then. Maya hung up and turned back to the man, but he was gone. She looked around. The busy concourse, but there was no sign of him anywhere. It was as if he'd vanished into the crowd. She packed up her equipment quickly, her mind churning with questions. Who was this man, and how had he known her mother? The timing of their conversation, right before her scholarship interview, felt like more than coincidence. As Maya made her way to the Upper East Side, she couldn't shake the feeling that forces beyond her understanding were aligning around her life. The scholarship opportunity, the mysterious man who'd known her mother, the accelerated timeline, it all felt connected somehow, though she couldn't see the pattern yet. An hour later, Maya stood outside a gleaming office building on Park Avenue, looking up at the directory that listed the Hartwell Foundation on the 32nd floor. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves, and stepped into the elevator that would carry her toward either the opportunity of a lifetime or the most elaborate setup she'd ever encountered. As the elevator climbed toward the 32nd floor, Maya made a mental note to ask Catherine Walsh about the foundation's selection process. In her experience, good things that happened too quickly usually came with strings attached. But maybe, just maybe, this was the exception, the miracle her mother had always believed music would eventually provide. She was about to find out which it was. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that screamed expensive taste, marble floors, abstract art, and furniture that probably cost more than Maya's entire year of living expenses. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 30s, greeted Maya with professional warmth and directed her to a conference room overlooking Central Park. Catherine Walsh turned out to be exactly what Maya had expected from their phone conversation. Impeccably. Dressed, sharply intelligent, and radiating the kind of confidence that came from controlling substantial resources. She was younger than Maya had imagined, probably mid-30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a perfect chignon and a handshake that conveyed both welcome and assessment. Maya. Thank you for coming on such short notice, Catherine said, gesturing. For Maya to sit at a polished conference table that could have seated 20 people. The room itself was intimidating, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan, original artwork that Maya suspected was worth more than most people's homes, and the kind of silence that only money could buy in New York City. "Thank you for considering me," Maya replied, trying to match Catherine's professional tone while fighting the nervous energy that always came with high-stakes situations. She'd changed into her best outfit, dark slacks, and a navy blouse she'd found at a thrift store, but felt underdressed in this temple of wealth and power. Catherine opened a leather portfolio and withdrew several documents, each bearing official letterheads and legal seals. "Let's start with the basics. The Hartwell Foundation was established to identify and support exceptional musical talent that might otherwise go unrecognized due to economic or social barriers. You fit our mission perfectly." Maya nodded, but something in Catherine's presentation felt rehearsed, as if she were delivering a pitch she'd memorized rather than conducting a genuine interview. The woman's smile was perfect, professional, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Our support is comprehensive," Catherine continued, sliding glossy brochures across the table. "A fully furnished one-bedroom apartment in Morningside Heights, near Columbia University and within walking distance of several conservatories. Complete tuition coverage for both high school completion and college preparation. A monthly stipend for living expenses, and access to private instruction with some of New York's finest musicians." Maya picked up one of the brochures, which showed photographs of an elegant apartment with hardwood floors, tall windows, and enough space for a real piano. It looked like something from a magazine, impossibly luxurious compared to the cramped studio she'd been sharing with 3 other teenagers. "It sounds incredible," Maya said carefully, setting the brochure down. "But I have to ask, why me? I mean, there must be hundreds of talented musicians who need support, maybe thousands in a city this size." Catherine's smile faltered slightly, and she shuffled the papers in front of her with movements that seemed suddenly less confident. "Sometimes opportunities align in unexpected ways. The right person at the right time with the right combination of talent and need." The answer felt evasive, and Maya's street-smart instincts began sending warning signals that had kept her alive on the margins of society. "Can you tell me more about the Foundation's history? When was it established? Who are the board members? What other students have you supported?" Catherine paused, clearly uncomfortable with the direct questioning. Her professional composure showed hairline cracks, like expensive makeup beginning to wear off under stage lights. "Maya, I think we should focus on your qualifications rather than administrative details. Would you mind playing something for me? I've arranged for a piano to be brought in." As if on cue, 2 men in matching uniforms wheeled a baby grand piano into the conference room, an instrument that probably cost more than most people's cars. The piano was a gleaming black Steinway, its surface so polished Maya could see her reflection in it. She stared at it in amazement, but also with growing suspicion. "This is a Steinway Model M," Catherine said, running her hand along the piano's glossy surface with obvious reverence. "I thought you deserved to audition on an instrument worthy of your talent. We had it brought up from Lincoln Center just for your audition." Maya approached the piano cautiously, her mind racing through the implications. Who arranged for a concert-quality instrument to be transported from one of the world's most prestigious performance venues to an office building for a single scholarship audition? The logistics alone would have cost thousands of dollars, and the casual way Catherine mentioned it suggested this was normal procedure. "This is beautiful," Maya said, pressing one of the keys experimentally. The tone was pure, rich, resonant in ways that made her portable keyboard seem like a toy by comparison. "But it seems like an extraordinary expense for a scholarship interview." "We believe in doing things properly," Catherine replied, but her voice carried a slight edge now. "The Foundation's donors are very generous in supporting our mission." Maya felt the familiar tightness in her stomach that had warned her away from dangerous foster homes and predatory adults throughout her teenage years. Everything about this situation felt orchestrated in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. The accelerated timeline, the luxury setting, the over-the-top accommodation, it all pointed to someone with serious money pulling strings behind the scenes. "Before I play," Maya said, settling onto the piano bench but not yet touching the keys, "I need to know something. Is this scholarship really based on merit, or is someone specifically arranging for me to receive it?" Catherine's professional mask slipped entirely for just a moment, revealing something that looked almost like panic. She glanced toward the door as if expecting or hoping for an interruption. "I'm not sure what you mean by that question." "I mean," Maya said, her voice growing stronger as her suspicions crystallized, "that in my experience, when things seem too good to be true, they usually are. And this whole situation feels like someone with a lot of money is trying to solve my problems without telling me why. Nobody spends this kind of money on a stranger without an agenda." Maya stood up from the piano bench, pacing toward the windows, overlooking Central Park. "Let me tell you what I think is happening here. Someone wealthy has taken an interest in me for reasons I don't understand. That same someone has created this foundation, possibly overnight, to funnel money and opportunities in my direction while maintaining the illusion that I've earned them through merit alone." Catherine started to protest, but Maya held up her hand. "I'm not finished. This mysterious benefactor has been watching me, probably for weeks, learning about my situation and my needs. The timing of everything, the masterclass invitation, this accelerated scholarship process, even the apartment availability, it's all too convenient to be coincidental." The conference room door opened unexpectedly, and Maya's breath caught as the mysterious man from Grand Central Station walked in. But now he wasn't alone. An older Asian woman in a business suit accompanied him, along with Dr. Hartman, who looked both excited and nervous. The man looked different in this setting. The expensive suit she'd noticed before made more sense now. He belonged in places like this, in rooms where million-dollar decisions were made over handshakes and signed documents. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly, and his eyes held the look of someone approaching a moment they'd been both dreading and hoping for. "Maya," Dr. Hartman said gently, stepping forward with the careful movements of someone approaching a spooked animal, "I think it's time you learned the truth about what's been happening." Maya backed against the window, feeling trapped between the vast cityscape behind her and the assembled adults who'd apparently been manipulating her life without her knowledge. What truth? The man, who she now realized had been watching her with the intensity of someone who knew exactly who she was, stepped forward with visible emotion. His voice shook when he spoke, as if the words were physically difficult to produce. "My name is Richard Harrison," he said, his voice thick with years of suppressed feeling. "And I'm your father." The words hit Maya like a physical blow, making her legs weak and her vision blur at the edges. She pressed her back against the cool glass of the window, using its solid surface to steady herself as the room seemed to tilt around her. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible, even in the silence that had fallen over the room. "My father is listed as unknown on my birth certificate. My mother never talked about him. She said she didn't know where he was." Richard's face crumpled with pain so raw and genuine that Maya felt it in her chest like a physical ache. "Your mother left me before you were born. I spent 15 years searching for both of you, but Sarah had disappeared completely. She changed her name, moved away, left no trail for me to follow. I only found you by accident 3 weeks ago, playing piano in the subway station." Maya's mind raced through the timeline, the man appearing at her performances, his emotional reactions to her music, his comment about knowing someone named Sarah, the way he'd looked at her with such intensity and familiarity. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity, creating a picture she'd never imagined possible. "You're the one behind all this," she said, gesturing around the luxury office with hands that shook with anger and betrayal. "The scholarship, the apartment, the masterclass invitation, the foundation itself. None of it's real. It's all just you trying to buy your way into my life." "The opportunity is real," the Asian woman interjected gently, stepping forward with the careful authority of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations. "My name is Patricia Chen. I'm a private investigator specializing in family reunification. The Hartwell Foundation is legitimate, and your talent genuinely qualifies you for their support. But yes, your father has made substantial donations to ensure you have access to opportunities you deserve." Maya felt betrayed and manipulated, her survival instincts screaming that she was being bought rather than helped. The careful independence she'd built over 2 years of survival on her own felt threatened by this revelation. "So what's the plan? You throw money at me until I'm grateful enough to play happy family with a stranger who abandoned me before I was born?" Richard flinched as if she'd struck him, his composure finally cracking completely. Tears began streaming down his face, and he made no attempt to hide them. "I didn't abandon you. I didn't even know Sarah was pregnant when she left me. She never told me she was carrying my child. Because you made it clear that your career was more important than anything else in your life." Maya shot back, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. The words seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her, from years of wondering why she'd never had a father, why her mother had struggled alone. She must have realized that a baby would just be another inconvenience for you to manage around your business deals. "You're absolutely right," Richard said quietly, his admission taking the wind out of Maya's anger. She'd expected denials or excuses, justifications and attempts to shift blame. Instead, he was accepting full responsibility in a way that left her momentarily speechless. "I was selfish and ambitious and too immature to understand what really mattered," Richard continued, his voice steady despite the tears. "Sarah tried to tell me that our relationship needed to come first, that family had to be more important than business success. But I wouldn't listen. I chose a company over the woman I loved and the child I didn't even know existed. I chose money and power over love, and I lost everything that actually mattered." The raw honesty in his voice made Maya pause. She'd spent years imagining confrontations with her absent father, but none of her fantasies had included this level of self-awareness and genuine remorse. "I spent the next 15 years building an empire," Richard continued, moving closer but stopping when he saw Maya tense. "I told myself that someday I'd find you and Sarah and make everything right with my success. I'd prove that the sacrifices had been worth it, that I could provide for you both in ways that would justify the time we'd lost." He gestured toward the window, encompassing the cities spread out below them. "I became one of the most powerful businessmen in New York. I made billions of dollars, acquired companies, employed thousands of people. I had everything I thought I wanted, but every success felt hollow because the 2 people who should have shared it with me were gone." Maya found herself listening despite her anger, drawn into the story of her own origin that she'd never heard before. "When I finally found you 3 weeks ago," Richard said, "I learned that Sarah was gone forever, and you were struggling alone while I lived in luxury just miles away. The scholarship, the apartment, the opportunities, it's not about buying your affection or manipulating you into accepting me. It's about giving you the security and chances I should have provided from the moment you were born." Maya looked around the room at the assembled adults who'd apparently been orchestrating her life without her knowledge. Dr. Hartman with her well-meaning mentorship, Patricia Chen with her professional expertise, Catherine Walsh with her carefully prepared presentation. And what about my roommates? Tommy, Zara, and Marcus are facing homelessness too, but I suppose they're not your responsibility since they're not your biological children. Catherine Walsh cleared her throat, consulting her notes with obvious relief at having something concrete to discuss. Actually, the Hartwell Foundation has expanded its mission to include comprehensive support programs for at-risk youth. Housing assistance, job training, educational opportunities, mental health support. We're prepared to offer help to your friends as well, tailored to their individual needs and goals. Maya felt overwhelmed by the scope of what Richard was proposing. You're trying to solve everyone's problems with money. You think you can just write checks and make everything better, erase 15 years of absence with a big enough donation. Money can't solve the most important problems, Richard said, his voice growing stronger as he found his footing in this crucial conversation. It can't bring back the 15 years I missed of your life. It can't undo the pain Sarah went through, raising you alone, working multiple jobs while battling illness. It can't make you forgive me for choices I can't change, or give us back the relationship we should have had from the beginning. He moved to stand near the piano, his hands resting on its polished surface. But money can give you options, Maya. It can give you the freedom to pursue your dreams without worrying about where you'll sleep tonight or whether you can afford to eat tomorrow. It can provide you with the education and training to develop your incredible talent without having to choose between music and survival. Maya stood and walked to the window overlooking Central Park, trying to process the magnitude of what she'd learned. Below, people moved through their lives with purpose and direction, most of them oblivious to the dramatic revelation unfolding 50 floors above. She could see joggers on the park paths, families with children, couples walking hand in hand, all the normal interactions of people whose lives weren't being turned upside down by impossible discoveries. "What do you want from me?" she asked without turning around, her voice barely carrying across the room. "Nothing," Richard said simply, and the word hung in the air with surprising weight. "I want to give you everything you need to build the life you choose, but I want nothing in return except the knowledge that you're safe and free to pursue your potential." Maya turned back to face him, studying his face for signs of deception or manipulation. What she saw instead was genuine grief, desperate hope, and a love so powerful it had driven him to move mountains while remaining completely invisible to her. College, music education, housing, security, all of it with no strings attached, Richard continued. "You don't have to have a relationship with me. You don't have to forgive me for the years I wasn't there. You don't even have to acknowledge that I exist. I just want to know that you have choices, that you can pursue your dreams without the limitations that poverty and instability create." Maya walked back to the piano and sat down on the bench, her fingers automatically finding the keys. "The piano lessons my mom gave me," she said slowly, beginning to play a gentle melody. "She always said music would eventually provide a path forward. She never said anything specific about you, but she never spoke bitterly about my father either. Just, sadly, like she missed something beautiful that had ended too soon." Richard's eyes filled with fresh tears as he listened to Maya play. She was the most incredible woman I've ever known, talented, compassionate, determined to make the world better through music education. She wanted to create programs for underprivileged children, to make sure every kid had access to musical instruction regardless of their family's financial situation. Everything good about you came from her wisdom and strength. "Not everything," Maya said quietly, her fingers moving into a more complex passage. "I'm stubborn and ambitious too. Sometimes I get so focused on goals that I forget about the people around me. Mom used to tease me about having tunnel vision when it came to music, about being willing to practice for hours while ignoring everything else. That sounds painfully familiar, Richard admitted with a weak smile. Sarah used to say the same things about me and my business obsessions. Maya stopped playing and looked directly at him. She kept one picture of you, hidden in her jewelry box with her most precious things. I found it after she died, when I was packing up our apartment. A young man in a college sweatshirt laughing at something off camera. She wrote "First Love" on the back. Richard's breath caught. Columbia Business School. That was taken during our senior year, right before everything fell apart. She loved you, Maya said simply. Even after everything that happened, even raising me alone and struggling with her illness, she kept that picture. She never married anyone else, never even dated seriously. I think part of her never stopped hoping you'd find your way back to us. The room fell silent, except for the distant sounds of city traffic far below. Richard wiped his eyes, struggling to compose himself enough to speak. Maya continued playing, transitioning into Claire de Lune, the piece she'd been working on when her mother died, the last song they'd played together. As the gentle melody filled the conference room, Maya felt something shift inside her. The anger and suspicion were still there, but underneath them was something else. Curiosity about the man who'd shared her love of music with her mother, who'd been searching for her for 15 years, who'd created an elaborate support system, just to ensure she could pursue her dreams safely. When she finished playing, the room was silent, except for the soft sound of Richard trying to control his emotions. I accept the scholarship, Maya said finally, her decision crystallizing as she spoke. Not because you're my father, but because I've earned it through my talent, my determination, my survival skills. Those are mine, built through years of work and struggle. The opportunities you're providing are just leverage to use what I've already accomplished. Richard nodded eagerly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. That's exactly right. You don't owe me anything, Maya. You never will. This is about giving you choices, not creating obligations. But I want to know about my mother, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. I want to know what she was like when you knew her, before life got so hard for her. I want to understand the person she was when she was young and full of dreams, before she had to become so strong just to survive. I like that more than anything, Richard said. I have stories, photographs, memories of the woman who changed my entire understanding of what mattered in life. I can tell you about her dreams for music education, her plans to revolutionize, how children learn to love music, her belief that every person has a song inside them waiting to be discovered. Maya stood up from the piano, her decision solidifying with each word. I'll take the apartment, the education support, all of it, but I want to earn any relationship we might have, if we're going to have one. No shortcuts, no special treatment beyond the opportunities you're already providing. If you want to be my father, you'll have to prove you deserve that title. Richard's smile was radiant despite his tears, transforming his entire face. I understand completely. And Maya, thank you for giving me the chance to try. Thank you for being willing to let me prove that I can do better than I did 15 years ago. 6 months later, Maya stood on the stage of Lincoln Center's Alice Tully Hall, her hands poised above the keys of a concert grand piano that made even the Steinway in the conference room seem modest by comparison. The hall was filled to capacity. Nearly 1,000 people had come to hear the debut recital of the Hartwell Foundation's first scholarship recipient. In the front row, her chosen family sat with obvious pride. Tommy wore a suit he'd bought with money from his new job at an environmental non-profit funded by the Foundation's community outreach program. Zara had enrolled in art school and was documenting Maya's journey through photography for her final project. Marcus, now studying business administration while working part-time at a recording studio, held the program with hands that shook slightly with emotion. Mrs. Rodriguez sat beside them, tears already streaming down her face before Maya had played. A single note. The superintendent had become an unofficial grandmother figure, attending every one of Maya's performances and keeping photo albums of her progress. Dr. Hartman and Professor Kellner occupied seats in the second row, their professional pride evident in their posture and attention. They'd watched Maya's development over the past months with the satisfaction of educators who'd recognized potential and seen it flourish under proper conditions. Patricia Chen sat near the back, her investigative work complete, but her interest in Maya's success ongoing. She'd become an unexpected friend, someone who understood the complexity of family reunification and the patience required to build trust after years of separation. In the fifth row, deliberately positioned where he could see Maya clearly but wouldn't dominate her sightlines, Richard Harrison sat quietly. He'd earned his place in that audience through months of patient relationship building, weekly dinners where they'd shared stories about Sarah and careful respect for Maya's boundaries and independence. Their relationship was still fragile, still developing, but it was real in ways that neither of them had expected. Maya had learned that Richard's love for her mother had been genuine, if immature, and that his regret over their separation had shaped 15 years of his life. Richard had discovered that his daughter possessed not only Sarah's musical gifts, but also a strength and wisdom that came from surviving challenges he'd never had to face. As Maya placed her fingers on the keys of the concert grand piano, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from subway busker to conservatory student, from homeless teenager to young artist with unlimited potential stretching ahead of her. But most of all, she thought about her mother, and how Sarah's faith that music would eventually provide a path forward had proven true in ways neither of them could have imagined. The melody of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 began to fill the concert hall, and Maya smiled as she felt her mother's presence in every phrase, guiding her hands and heart toward a future bright with infinite possibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us.